Caddis Maximus here, this time with a review of the original Thorson dogbone socket wrench, or universal box wrench. There's been a few different terms used to describe these. Now, it was a long time ago, I think it was 20 years ago, when Thorson originally came out with them, and I believe Thorson is actually the true originator of this style of universal wrench. It has 8 different sizes, and it's kind of called a socket wrench because these are like sockets, and you just flip them around and you get 4 sizes on each end. They did make these in metric. This is the imperial one, and it has 8 sizes, and going by 1/16 of an inch from 3/8 to 13/16. Now, these came out after Thorson was already making their tools overseas. This is a Taiwanese unit, and this isn't, I did pick this up at a garage sale, and it is not the finest example. It's not actually too beat up or rusty, but it shows some of the issues. Thorson did integrate a very high strength, a very high quality neodymium rare earth magnet, and that has some positives and negatives. One of the negatives, obviously, is the way the chrome plating ends up peeling off, and then they do corrode. They have a high iron content. This not being the finest example, we can see that the beam is actually bent and curved sideways, and it's cupped or bowed, so it's actually bent in 2 directions, but it is forged chrome vanadium steel. These things are like 40 bucks on the shelf, and the reason for that is that these heads here required a really complicated die to forge out. These are forged tool steel, chrome vanadium steel heads, and they are broached, but they had to have a multi-piece die that all squished it at the same time to keep it from cracking apart. Traditional sockets, this is a small one, just have 2 dies. One that it gets set into, where the little billet of steel is put into, and another one that comes over the backside and smashes it into its rough shape, usually progressively in 3 or 4 stages. Many times that will actually, they don't even, the dies are good enough. I was looking at a video where they aren't broaching the socket end. The actual forging process is that high a definition. And then they, of course, chrome plate them and roll stamp them. This type of head would require a very complicated die. You just couldn't come in on 2 sides with a hollowed out piece of metal. It really required a process. And then you had to drill the holes. And then these are press fit pins, and surprisingly enough, the pins are pressed into the socket, not into the yoke on this wrench. Other things, properties, is it does have a lot of play. So this is like a general kind of toolbox wrench where you throw it in the back of your the pickup truck toolbox or something like that. Use it to assemble a swing set, fix a bicycle, tighten something up on a trailer. And then they had just a decent amount of popularity. They really pushed hard on just this type of wrench, and it is handy for what it is, because you do get the performance of a socket where it just holds on nicely. It is flex, so that does give it just a little bit more versatility. And it flexes in a roto head style fashion, which means that the flex is right in the center line of the socket. So when you're putting this on a fastener, unlike a normal flex head wrench where it kind of wants to flip the head out of the way, since this is right in the center line of the socket and it pivots about that center line, so it's the same performance no matter what size you're using, is you can just put it on a surface and it really just wants to stay there, because it's just like you're pushing down right on the back of the socket. So it does make it pretty easy to get on fasteners. It does have some other properties which are advantageous, kind of like through-hole sockets. Let's see if I got the right size here. Is the nature of this allows you to put a long bolt through it, so you can put this down long threaded rods. Maybe moving to another issue is the broaching or the forging just isn't that tight. They do flute the sockets, we can see there. They are undercut, which is nice, but they are just a bit oversized. We can see that here if we just use this little fastener, and we can see how much play there is, and that's actually quite a bit of play. If we take a nice fitting socket of the same size, we can see that the fastener moves around quite a bit less, about half as much. So we know that it's the sizing just is a bit loose, and it's probably good for a wrench like this because it's just made for easy and quick rough work where you may not know what size you have, and so you just grab this thing. Obviously, it's not low profile. I mean, this is not getting in the tight spaces, but I suppose the flexing helps a little bit. I'll come to the last point here, which is this magnet, which is kind of a good idea. It's was actually not just an afterthought where they just glued it to the surface of the wrench, but we can see where they actually stamped a divot to set that magnet into. Problem is, it's a neodymium ceramic magnet, so the chrome plating peels off, it will corrode, it's subject to get beat up and chipped and broken apart. And even though they put a really strong one on there, which is nice, you know, if you have various bolts and fasteners and you work and they're loose, you can actually stick them to the wrench. It's more than strong enough to stick to a side of a toolbox and just keep the wrench holding up there. But it can pose issues because obviously as this is in your toolbox, everything else that's steel will get stuck to it. And could you imagine a whole toolbox of standard wrenches like this where they all had magnets in them? Even if you had them laid out nicely, inevitably you drop a wrench and they don't suck themselves up into a big jammed pile. And so I think the idea of having a magnet on the wrench, on this type of wrench, is a good idea, but not really any other types of wrenches. So a couple people actually had mentioned about doing a review of these dog bone wrenches because people see them. And for some reason they just won't go away. Harbor Freight has them, but they're surprisingly expensive even there just because of the complicated forgings. And they're like $20 or $25 for Harbor Freight's version. And I definitely would stay away from Harbor Freights. This is the type of wrench that you're going to stand on and abuse. And that one I don't know would quite hold up as well as even a Taiwanese Thorsen. Actually, I'm pretty sure this Thorsen would hold up better, even though it does have a pretty rough fit and finish. I shouldn't say the finish. The chrome plating is actually pretty decent and seems to have held up pretty well. No roll stamping, though. They did use the cheaper laser etching. And surprisingly enough, they're just relying on calling it the dog bone. There is no part number on this thing. Kind of odd. Anyway, that was my review of the dog bone wrench. These types of wrenches, you know, are kind of handy just for, you know, stick in the bucket of tools when you're, you know, toss it on the boat, that type of thing. But as far as doing, like, you know, auto mechanics, this is not going to really find many uses in those types of situations. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.